All right, Chapter 7, Section 2 is called Kingdoms and States of Africa. So we've talked about ancient Egypt, and they are a major ancient civilization. Section 1 mentioned the Kush and the Aksum, and those were smaller groups of Africa in ancient times or in early times. And then now we're going to mention several more. Okay, so the first kingdom that we're going to mention is the Kingdom of Ghana. And in 500 AD, the Kingdom of Ghana, and many of these that are mentioned in Section 2, established themselves as trading kingdoms or trading civilization. This one happened to be in West Africa, along the upper Niger River. Today, the country of Ghana is not in this location. It's further south, but it's still in this general area. So they established as farmers, and they lived in villages under one particular ruler. Now, the kings of Ghana were very strong rulers that had a very strong army. But the weird thing is they didn't have a set of laws to follow. So a lot of times they had to negotiate things that happened. They call it an audience. And so they would sit in and they would kind of talk about what they were upset about to the king and his subordinate kings. So al-Bakri, who was not African, but he was a Muslim traveler, said this particular quote in the 11th century. He said, "The king sits in an audience to hear grievances against officials in a domed pavilion around which stand 10 horses covered with gold embroidered materials. Behind the king stand 10 pages holding shields and swords decorated with gold. And on his right are the sons of the subordinate kings in his country wearing splendid garments and their hair mixed in with gold." So most of what we know about these kingdoms and states of Africa were passed down by stories and accounts of other people in music, in song. And so al-Bakri was one of those people that witnessed things going on in this kingdom and talked about how they managed their grievances. Ghana lived off the land for their economy. They had a lot of iron, and so because of that, they had blacksmiths that dedicated to making tools and weapons of iron. It was also considered to be one of the richest gold-producing areas. They imported metal goods, textiles, horses, and salt from Muslim merchants that came to Ghana from northern Africa. They needed salt, not necessarily how we use it today, but for a health reason, that they needed to replenish the salt that their bodies lost due to the extensive hot climate. And so the salt trade was huge in Africa. They also did trade by a method of silent trade, which was mentioned on 229. And the quote says, "Great people of the Sudan lived in this area of Ghana. They had traced a boundary which no one sets out to them ever crosses. When the merchants reach this boundary, they place their wares and cloth on the ground and then depart. And so the people of Sudan come bearing gold, which they leave beside the merchandise and then depart. The owners of the merchandise then return, and if they were satisfied with what they had found, they take it. If not, they go away again, and the people of Sudan return and add to the price until the bargain is concluded." So they didn't negotiate in person. They just put down how much gold they thought it was worth, and if that was acceptable, they would take the gold and exchange that for goods. So kind of a unique way to trade. So things that they exported, that they traded out: ivory, ostrich feathers, hides, and yes, slaves. And again, those are a little bit different because these were the people within Africa typically, not talking about exporting slaves across, to another continent. The Berbers were a group of nomadic people who used camels as caravans for this large amount of trade. These caravans were called fleets of the desert, and they were anywhere up to 100 camels, and camels are, of course, beasts of burden, so they were loaded down with goods that they were going to trade. And so the camel caravans were like the ancient semi-trucks today that transport goods all over. Camels, of course, were very adaptable to the sand and hot climate and lack of food and water. So they were excellent for doing this. The only problem is they don't move very fast. So it took anywhere from 40 to 60 days to get to most of the new trading locations to exchange goods and so forth. Now, trading is what got all of these merchants their wealth. And of course, there were taxes that were on any goods that came in and any goods that went out of the kingdom. So, on the chart in your notes, you need to fill in some information about the Kingdom of Ghana. The capital is Saleh, and so you can see that in black at the top. And Ghana, again, that green region is where we're talking about. It's, of course, in West Africa, and the Ghana Kingdom flourished between 400 AD to 1200 AD. The goods that they traded, iron products, animal products, and gold. And Ghana traded for salt. That was important from them to get from the Saharan salt mines that was in northern Africa. All right, the next small kingdom is the Kingdom of Mali, and it too was also a great trading society. It was founded by Sundiata Keita, and you can see that he ruled from 1210 to 1260, and he gets credit for defeating Ghana and capturing the capital in 1240. He had a very strong government, but he was also known as the Lion Prince. And the lion was the symbol of the Keita clan, which of course he was part of. And so he belonged to this rule of families that governed Mali for about 2 centuries. He was born with a disability, unable to walk. He overcame that, and with the aid of this blacksmith who made him braces, that he could walk, and gradually he did learn to walk. It was a hard, painful process. His brother-in-law became the king, and so he had to kind of overcome that as well. So when he became the ruler, he had to overcome lots of obstacles. But this, he kept his traditional African religion as well as becoming Muslim. So those two religions were founded here in Ghana. And again, the people believed that the king had magical powers, and this made him a great king, and he was thought of as kind of the founder or father of this country. So later on, we'll talk about him being the Lion Prince, and we're going to compare that to the Disney movie, The Lion King, which some people say was based off of this guy. All right, so trading was important. So they traded salt and gold, and they got a lot of wealth from that. Their trade region was expanded by Mansa Musa, and he expanded it from the Atlantic coast all the way to Timbuktu. And besides trading, the Mali people farmed sorghum, millet, and rice. And Mansa Musa was actually the grandnephew of Sundiata Keita from earlier. He ruled from 1312 to 1337. He was known as one of the richest and most powerful kings because of what he did later on. He doubled the size of the kingdom. He divided this large kingdom into provinces that had individual governors, which made sense to try to maintain it. And he was considered to be one of the more powerful kings because of what he was known for. All right, so as summarized just from that last video, he took a pilgrimage or a religious trip to Mecca. Again, being a devout Muslim, that's where all Muslims go once in their life, and that trip is called Hajj. He loaded up again with servants and camels and lots of gold because they had lots of gold. He not only gave it to the poor people on his trip, but he also gave it to a lot of the people that hosted them or housed them on their journey there and back. So because of this, he was, a well-liked king, and he was known as a great ruler of this prosperous and powerful kingdom. As the video mentioned, he helped build mosques or Muslim churches and encouraged the study of the Islamic holy book called the Quran. So he built he had architects build the mosques that were similar to the ones in Cairo and Arabia, and the Sankor Mosque is probably the most famous one, which is pictured there. All right, and all good things must come to an end for the Mali people, and in 1359 there was a civil war, and a new group of people, the Songhai, were flourishing and of course then kind of took over that area.